Hey, Bryan, did you know that horses can consume up to 4 kilograms of pasture in a 4-hour grazing period based on about a 500 kilogram horse?
Welcome, everyone, to episode 91 of the Sen Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host, Bryan and Peter, and today's topic is hay or pasture, what to feed and when. How are you, Peter?
Bryan, I'm battling today. I think both of us are a little bit under the weather from Equitana a little while ago. So we weren't sick, but we were just the sheer volume of talking and meeting our customers and everything else. And just, we're a bit overwhelmed as well with all the people that they come up to us say g'day. So we're back on track. And obviously we did promise our customers and even new clients that we met at Equitana that we would do this on a weekly basis.
Yeah, we put our heart and soul into those 4 days, and it was an amazing time to connect with everyone. And I think one of the most valuable feedbacks of the podcast was more gin jokes.
Well, Bryan, I don't know about that. I'll tell you what, you're like a fish to water with a Long Island iced teas.
Oh, I've got a soundboard as well. Yeah, let's not mention those Long Island iced teas, Pete. But we had a good time on the Friday night after Equitana, connecting with both ambassadors and fellow companies. And I think what we do have in common is we like gin and we do like Long Island iced teas, hey, Pete?
100%, Bryan. And this podcast was obviously stemmed from that with it was an interaction with one of our customers, and she was feeding both pasture and hay, and just sort of said, hey, look, am I doing the right thing? And we sort of said, like, what do you mean? She goes, yeah, I'm feeding both. Do I need to feed both? And she said, look, if you could explain that to other people, because obviously she's got friends at a feeding centre that are doing a similar feed regime to what we obviously recommend with the Sen feed pyramid. And I said, look, that's a great point. We'll take that on board. And here we are now.
Yeah, we always want to know the exact reason why we're feeding a particular way. And because we say pasture/hay, it doesn't mean you have to feed both, and that's what Peter and I will address in this podcast today. And we think it's one of the most important parts, or if not the most important part, of a horse's diet. Yeah,
100%. Obviously, we sound like a broken record with this, that horses need to get majority of their calories from pasture or hay, and it's probably good. Like, we've done 90 odd, and we haven't really done a specific, why pasture or why hay, or even more so when. But the nuts and bolts of it is, if you do have pasture, especially this time of the year, try to get as much pasture into your horse as possible. And the reason for that is because it's a lot cheaper than feeding hard feed. That's the biggest reason. And people might say, oh, look, it's got high calcium, low calcium, it's got this, it's got that. That's well okay, and obviously we have got obviously different products to help correct those deficiencies when needed, but it's the healthiest and it's the cheapest form of calories that's out there for a horse.
And when you look at the costs of a horse, the initial outlay, you might be in the hundreds, if not thousands, for really good performance horses. Shortcutting on their essential part of their diet just doesn't make sense. We would much rather you feed less hard feed and find the best quality hay or pasture that you can get. And that's even zeroing down to your pasture analysis or your hay analysis.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover in this podcast, Bryan. So we'll try to keep it sort of to maybe 5 or 6 different points. And I'm sure that we're going to go on a tangent as well once something else pops up. But the fundamental is that try to keep the horse on a pasture as possible. And then when your pasture runs out or it gets a little bit low or they've overgrazed it, then what you need to do is you need to try to incorporate a grassy hay. And all that grassy hay does, it's going to mirror, or it's going to try to replicate the pasture that's just run out, up until the pasture obviously can regrow, regenerate, change a season, so forth. And then a cycle goes back to pasture, and then you phase the hay out.
Yeah, and just a side note, that's not a cereal hay, that's a grassy hay. Cereal hays often contain too much sugar and starch, and that's not what we advocate. And we want to look for a grassy hay like Rhodes grass that's up here, or teff hay in the southern states.
And Coxfoot sort of in New South Wales and Victoria as well. We are testing a veld grass at the moment as well, which is pretty readily available in Victoria. So once those analyses we'll come back for that particular grass. We'll let our listeners know. So that might be another addition to the grassy hay portfolio if it ticks all the boxes in the analysis as well.
Yeah, and when you know the analysis, you know what you're looking for in terms of balancing up the vitamin mineral profile, and that's where our products come into. But Pete will take you through what the average levels of nutrients are in hay and pastures.
Yeah, so basically, maybe Bryan will kick off with pasture first. So obviously, pasture, depending on your location and sort of whereabouts it. Look, the protein levels can range from anywhere from 7.5% to 22, 23, 25, even a little bit higher for a lucerne as well. So it does vary substantially. In terms of hay, that depends on obviously when it's cured and when it's cut. Also, a lot, depends on when it's been dried, like whether it's a very hot day, whether it's a humid day, whether it's a cool day. And what that means is that if it's a very hot day, then obviously, the carbohydrates levels are going to be more intact. Or if it's a colder day, then the carbohydrates won't be as high in the stored hay, once it's been cured.
Yeah, and that's a really good comparison between the two. With regards with vitamin minerals, live pasture contains the full range, and it is in higher levels compared to hay because once cut, especially vitamin C, E, B vitamins, they're lost in that whole process. But then there's other vitamin minerals that aren't as stable as well.
Yeah, and that's where the product like the grain-free complete feed or the CF50 come in. So what those two products do is we help correct the deficiencies in that particular pasture. And as Bryan said, it might be a vitamin D, might be a C, vitamin E, B vitamins, even zinc and copper as well. I mean, they're one of the ones that are really low in Australian pastures specifically. Compared to, so maybe like in North America or Europe, where the iron in Australia is extremely high and the zinc and copper are extremely low, as we mentioned in our previous podcasts as well.
And what we know about Australian soils and in both pasture and hay is sodium and chloride, as well as copper and zinc, they are generally deficient. So this is really required to balance up when you domesticate a horse, when you're putting them under conditions that involve high performance. You need sodium, you need chloride, you need copper and zinc to support their body systems. This needs to be both supplemented when either feeding a hay or pasture.
Yeah, Bryan, that's well summarised. And just one further point onto that as well, since we're on the live pasture. And this is from a Paul Ciliano from North Carolina State University. And why it's important, so he's got a formula there of grams per dry matter per kilogram of body weight. And what it showed that 4 hours of grazing on pasture for a 500 kilogram horse produces about 3.6 kilograms of pasture. So as a rule of thumb, let's just round it up for every 4 hours, you're looking at around about 4 kilograms of pasture for a 500 kilogram horse.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you look at a horse, a 500 kg horse, 1.5 to 2% of the body weight is required in roughage because you got to support that whole digestive system and lower the risk of certain conditions such as colic. So you want to be getting around 8 to 10 kgs.
Yeah, and that's only, Bryan, sort of 3-4 hours of grazing. So a lot of our customers, when we sort of say, look, you got to increase your roughage, put them out on pasture. If you don't have pasture, obviously give them ad lib hay. A lot of our sort of customers that we talk to, they're like, oh, is it going to be enough? I might need to give them more hard feed. But this little example from Paul Ciliano, basically saying 4 kilograms, 4 hours, 500 kilogram horse. This is full pasture. It's not really that hard to get your 2.5% in roughage in. Obviously for hay, because it's dried out, it might need a little bit more. But it just shows you if a horse is grazing over a 24-hour period, they're going to be getting more than enough for to maintain their body score, if not put condition on.
Yeah, and then it comes down to your paddock management. Pasture obviously gets worn down and exhausted in certain paddocks, so rotating them through so that you can have that all season long, and then when that's all exhausted, then you can turn to your hay. And one excellent website for hay is feedcentral.com.au. Now, we're not associated with them. We use them to test pastures and hays from various trainers or farms that are interested in the profile of their pasture.
Hey, Bryan, you sound very passionate about Feed Central. Are you sure they're not giving you any backhanders?
No, they're not putting a gin in the mail, that's for sure.
Not a bottle anyway.
No. But no, Feed Central are excellent. If anyone hasn't discovered them, just jump on their website. They have an extensive profile of hay and grain for sale through farms that have got it tested. So, for example, I've just pulled one up in front of us, is a rosegrass hay. They do a visual grading. They show you the whole profile, how many tons are available, the price per ton, and also the quality certificate, which is quite extensive, which just really shows the whole, even the crop height, the irrigation that it went under, also the cutting and curing type. It's quite impressive. And then most importantly for us is that whole nutrient profile, the energy, protein, fiber, and the minerals. So once you have this and then you buy that hay in bulk, then you can really zero down and look at what hard feed will balance to this most appropriately. And what we've done at Sen is with the Sen Grain Free or the Sen CF50, we have the vitamin mineral profile that matches typically to the Australian conditions, and that you're not going to overload on any of the sugar and starches because it's 100% grain free.
That's very well covered, Bryan. And I'm going to give our listeners a bit of a hack here as well, which is what I do sometimes. So let's just say you've got a barley hay or an oat hay or a row or a rye hay, possibly clover. What I do is I jump on Feed Central. I try to find that particular hay, and chances are they've already got an analysis from a farmer that's selling that. And what I use it for is to go, all right, well, the average parameters for a rye hay or a clover are X amount. So it sort of saves the user or the listener by cutting their own cutting their own pasture, sending it out to Feed Central. I mean, if you want to get that specific, I'm all for it. And Bryan's going to list a link for Feed Central. But if you just want to get an idea, like you might be potentially looking at getting a hay from a grower and go, all right, well, like I don't know anything about hays. And there are very good reference points from Feed Central that you can use to get an exact result. As Bryan mentioned, you can actually put I think it's about half a kilo that we normally send away, and they'll do a full lab test on it, so you know exactly where you're standing. But just be mindful that every season that hay is going to go up and down. There's going to be slight changes left and right. So it's not sort of God's Bible, but it's a very good sort of foundation to work off to balance up that particular hay with, like as Bryan said, the C50, say for the vitamins, minerals. You might need obviously a product like the Senor for the omega-3, because the hay has dried out. Obviously it's lost a lot of its omega-3, omega-6 and omega-9. So by adding the Senor, you're just going to bring up that profile to try to match live pasture to as close as possible.
Looking at numbers and when we're trying to balance diets, I really love this service that they provide. You know where you stand, you know where your levels are, and then you've got a starting point of what you need to do to balance the diet. Peter and I have done hundreds of analysis, even through farms throughout Australia, that have spent so much money on their pasture. When you look at their pasture profile, why not spend that extra money getting it tested in each paddock? Then you can see how rich the protein is, then you can see where the calcium stands, and you're going to really have a good impact on what you need to help balance that. And you'll be saving money, because some of these farms were feeding up to 4 or 5 kgs of a certain hard feed. When they switched to the Sen Grain Free and the Sen Lupin pellet, they could reduce that volume by half and rely more on their pasture to fill those gaps and be the sole foundation. And we've done it time and time again, and we'll continue to go down this process, because they're getting better structural growth in their horses. And also they've just noticed that their horses are a lot more happier as well, because they're being fed according to their physiology.
Bryan, you took the words out of my mouth. It's exactly the point I was going to make as well. And I might just, put my 2 cents on top here. It sort of does our heads in where, a farm, hopefully there's not too many listening here because they're going to hate me. But like if you're a farmer and you spend all these big dollars on getting the pasture up there, so it's, it's balance of calcium, phosphorus, everything that all the young, growing horses needs, as well as the brood mares. You've done all that work, and then you're going to jam them with, as Bryan said, 5 kilograms of a grain byproduct base feed, or one that's got meal run through it, or chopped chaff, or whatever the flavor of the month is, you're gonna load that horse with 5 kilograms of a hard feed. Of course, it's not going to eat 5 more kilograms of the pasture because you've just taken the room in its guts. You fed it a pellet up to 5, 6, whatever kilograms you're feeding. You're costing your money. There's a chance of doing quite substantial damage to that particular horse if it eats that 5 kilograms in one sitting. And I might have mentioned this before, but horses can only tolerate 2.2 kilograms of a grain-based feed in any one sitting. Hence why normally if you are feeding grain, you need to break it up into 2 or 3 different meals. And that's why obviously a lot of the nutritionists said, break up the meals into 2 or 3 or 4 a day. It's for that reason, because they can only tolerate 2.2 kilograms. So just getting back on the point where if you're gonna do all that work, get as much pasture into the horse as you can. It's cheaper, it's healthier. Correct any deficiencies with some of our products, even another company's products, if they're worthy of your hard-earned dollars. And then just let the horse flourish naturally, not on a product that's got byproducts and anything else that it doesn't need on top of the pasture.
Yeah, Peter, I think you've got me fired up now because we look at even performance stables, and you've ignited this now.
It's Sent after dark, Brian.
It's the same principle. So you're a horse in a stable only getting 2 biscuits of hay per day, when a horse's physiology relies on that long stem roughage and not the short stem roughage that they're overfed in terms of the chaff, which is overpriced, chopped up hay. And what we want to try and promote is more saliva, which is from the long stem roughage. And that can be achieved by 24/7 access to grassy hay. You don't have to overload them, as Peter says, with high volumes of hard feed if you don't have your foundations right with that long stem roughage. So yeah, we'll just continue trying to change that landscape. And I think over the 8 or 9 years, Peter and I have changed the landscape in many horse industries, notably the racing one, where we are consulting the leading stables just to try and have a better profile for that thoroughbred horse in particular, because we know after their life or their career on the track, they're going to be an off-the-track thoroughbred, and we want them to be in the best condition as possible and not that new owner chasing their tail with side effects from low pasture and roughage throughout that career. So we're on a mission.
Yeah, and like you said, Brian, like okay, your words. It gets frustrating sometimes because we're sort of, we repeat ourselves a lot, and it's to different people. And I'm more than happy for anyone to question you and me why we say what we say, why we advise what we advise. But we haven't had one person in 8-9 years to go, hey, I'm going to kill my horse because I'm feeding too much hay. It's a good position we're in, but we're not hay merchants. We're not selling hay. We want the healthiest feed for the horse, and that's what hay is. So unless you're gonna sleep straight in bed at night knowing what you're selling, then just maybe some companies need to have a think about what their priorities are.
Yeah, 100%. We're here for the horse first and foremost, and then what results from that is a happy, healthy owner. And I think as one really awesome client said at Equitana, how. Do you want to say it, Pete? Or?
If I can remember, Brian, you've put me on the spot now. So she said, I think it was Renee. Renee, if you're listening, I'm pretty sure it was you. And what she said, this might sound funny, but she said, instead of us owners reaching out for the calming supplements for our horse, your feed program is a calming supplement for us.
We just couldn't put it better ourselves. So Sen is the calming supplement for the horse owner.
Correct. And the horse, because the horse isn't playing up, then the owner isn't stressing. So we sort of killed 2 birds with one stone. Yeah,
it was a really good creative line from Renee, and we really wanted to mention it on here and found it funny, but also true.
It's true. And one last point on this topic, Ron, I'll add too. I don't know whether our listeners actually realise, maybe some do, some don't, but hay actually has carbohydrates in it. So, and it all depends. Like if it's been cut pretty much, relatively quickly, it hasn't, like it's been baled, relatively quickly, it's going to have a lot more carbohydrates in it than if it's just been cut, left there for 2-3 weeks or 4 weeks and then it's been baled. So this is why it's very important to know that, your hay actually does have carbohydrates. Your sugar in spring grass can have up to 25-30% sugar. And then you're going to be feeding 4 or 5 kilograms of a product that could have 38-40% starch in it on top of your 30% sugar. I mean, that's almost 70% of the diet between sugar and starch. Like, how on earth is that healthy to a horse that's a vegetarian, that's a fiber fermenter?
Yeah, no, 100%. And it makes it even more important that we don't overdo that sugar and starch in the hard feeds, and that's where we have positioned our products to help balance those conditions for whatever hay or pasture that the owner wants to feed. At least we're keeping that hard feed at a safe profile. Yeah,
it's all about balance, Bryan, as we try to preach weekly here. So maybe just in summary, we'll summarize this podcast. The priority needs to go on pasture. So, pasture before hay. We don't recommend that you feed both, like unless there's a very, very valid reason, because the more things you feed in terms of feeding a pasture and a loosened hay, say at the same time, then you got to try to balance out the protein. You got to try to balance out the calcium and phosphorus. So the more things that you add, the harder it is to balance. So feed pasture first, then obviously go on to your hay once your pasture runs out. As Bryan mentioned, contact the great guys at Feed Central if you did wanted to do a hay or pasture analysis to know where you stand. If you bought a brand new property, it's probably worthwhile getting a pasture analysis done because you know where your foundation is. Obviously, if you've got a good hay merchant, ask them for a hay analysis. Most of the good ones will have one, and we just don't want to work with the ones that sell the Rhodes grass off the side of the road.
Gee, haven't we seen some quality over our time?
I don't know whether you call it quality, Bryan. It looked more like a weed than a hay to me.
They stick it in the middle of the biscuit of hay.
Yeah. That's the surprise you get when you unwrap your present, when you get right to the meat and the potatoes.
Yeah, or the big round bale. It looked good on the outside, but absolutely horrible on the inside.
Is that similar to good from far, but far from good?
Yeah, you could say that.
Anything else, Bryan, that you wanted to add on the closing comments?
Well, I have a little bit of a report from Feed Central that came through my emails a couple of days ago, and they do sort of a market appraisal of hay going into 2023. It's not good news for horse owners. It says that there's a further reduction of volume of hay that they can see compared to this year, and which they can predict there will be a bit of an upside on the price in 2023 because of the favourable growing conditions of particularly the cereal hays, the wet spring, and also it's encouraging the growers to stick with grain and not cut for hay. So that's going to reduce hay supply. That being said, grassy hay, if you can try and source it, that's what we advocate, and that's probably where you need to be, because if you can find a good grassy hay with a good profile, take advantage of that and get as much as you can, because when you do switch hay types or hay batches, it is known that it takes around 3 to 4 weeks for the horse's microbiome to adjust to that new fiber profile that it has. So switching hays or switching hay batches should be limited per year. And then when you are doing it, having digestive support like a product like Send Extra Balance is pretty important in terms of giving that insurance for that transition, because it's just like changing a profile of a feed. If you're giving a little bit more protein, a little bit less sugars and starches, or more or less micronutrients there, then then the horse's body needs to adjust to that, and that should be when you closely monitor your horse.
Yeah, that's well summarized, Bryan. And sort of one last point I'd like to make as well, with everything going up and what you said on that report for 2023, hay prices are gonna be going up as well. It's probably a good time now, or even sort of early next year, to get out and just look at your diet. We are offering the free diet analysis these days, but they're in a phone consult now. So you get 30 minutes either with myself, Bryan, or Magellan to go over your diet. So what we need to do, maybe to balance it, maybe take things out that you don't need to be feeding, or even both. And this is a good time, because obviously with things increases, you don't want to be adding stuff you don't need, i.e. chaff, chopped up hay. It's going to be, we say sold at 3-4 times the price, might be times 10 the price, the way everything's going. So the point I'm trying to make is that don't be scared to contact us to do the 30-minute phone consult now. We give you our individual time, so it's more specific than just having, like a random one done, key in a few numbers and things like that. And you know where you stand. So you might not be requiring 3 or 4 different supplements or additives that you're adding, because, your pasture or the hay that you're feeding is actually more nutritious than what you think. And we can help you with that. So it is going to be probably easier on your wallet. It'll be less stress for you as the horse owner. And probably most importantly, you'll have a healthier horse.
Yeah, I echo those thoughts from Peter, and we're here to simplify the diet, not make it more complicated. We've simplified thousands of diets, and we will continue to do that and help as many horse owners as possible, because they're all individuals, and that's what we feel at Sen, that they are worthy of a one-on-one consult, and they've been very popular and successful.
Well, Bryan,
so
I
might have more money for gin.
Well, I think that summarizes everything. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's about it for today. We really value everyone's support again from Equitana. That was absolutely amazing. And as promised, Peter and I will be back for weekly podcasts.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.